Casey Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider. A glorious Friday to you, sir.
Doesn't get much better than Conference Championship Sunday.
Sure doesn't, especially when the home team is involved. It's a lot different feel this week, too, Casey, than last week. Last week, I think there was a lot of trepidation, and I'm not saying there's arrogance and that people think, wholeheartedly that the Eagles are going to win, but I definitely feel that people think have a different feel this week than they did last week against Atlanta. So let me start off by asking, Philly and Minnesota, does one team have a significant advantage in terms of talent to you?
To me, when I'm grading out the Minnesota front seven and I'm grading out the Minnesota blockers, when I'm grading that section of the teams, Philadelphia has a huge edge. The Minnesota's defensive front seven is vastly overrated, and their blockers are really not that good. Their pass block better than their run block, but they're not going to let Keenum throw the ball. If you look at special teams, the Eagles have a big edge in special teams. I'm looking at a number of sections going, I don't see many places other than in the secondary where I think the Vikings have more shutdown players in the secondary. Beyond that, I don't think they have much of an edge in talent at all.
All right, so let's look at some of the matchups to watch. Let's start with the Eagle offense and go up against this Viking defense. The Eagles' offensive line against this Vikings defensive front. Break down those matchups for us.
The Eagles' offensive line, they rank fourth in the league this year in a metric I have called good blocking productivity. It really measures just general overall effectiveness in the ground game. They were fifth in the league in good blocking rate, which means they're very efficient. So I really like that portion of their game. Minnesota's rush defense, vastly overrated. They were 31st in good blocking rate allowed for the season, and in the month of December, they were 30th in yards allowed before first defensive contact per carry. So this is a defense that's not been playing well, not just early in the year. They've not been playing particularly well against the run all season long. Their pass rush isn't that great either. They're 16th in the league in pass pressure rate are the Vikings, and so the Eagles, even though they were 19th in pass pressure rate for the second half of the season, I think that's going to be a wash there. I think the Eagles win that matchup.
Okay, if you're looking at the ability to run the ball against the Vikings. Last week, Minnesota did a great job against New Orleans in that first half of the game against that Kamara-Ingram duo. Do you like Philly's opportunities in the run game this week?
I think Philadelphia's going to have to make Minnesota pay for bringing the safety in the box, because that's one of the things that Minnesota will do is say, we're going to bring the safety in the box to stop the run. Minnesota has some great safeties. Sendejo and Harrison Smith are two superb safeties. So I want to make them pay if they're going to do that, is when I'm thinking about the Eagles. And that means going to the tight end and throwing a lot of passes that way. So I want to make them pay for that, because I think unless the Vikings bring that safety in the box, when I'm grading out the front seven, I just don't think they can win against the Eagles. Now that when the Eagles play well in their front, when they're blocking well, I've said they're ranked fifth in good blocking rate. There are times when they were just one of the most dominant offensive lines I've seen all year. So the Vikings really, I think, are going to have to go all out to stop the rush.
You mentioned the tight end. The Vikings are pretty good at defending the tight end in the pass game in that aspect. Nick Foles, he's going to want to get those short, quick passes, much like he did last week. But is Zach Ertz going to be a guy that he's going to have trouble finding?
I give them all three tight ends. I don't just give them Ertz. I give them Ertz. I give them Selleck. I give them Burton. I make sure that they're having to think about all three tight ends and say, you want to bring your safeties down. We're going to make your safeties go crazy with how many tight ends we're going to send in the routes and such. Or we're going to come up and we're going to, you want to go up against us blocking wise? Fine, we'll put all our tight ends in there, because most of the tight ends, their tight ends are pretty good blockers too. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm rotating all those guys in there and really making Minnesota think about that, because the corners are the one place. If I'm the Eagles, I don't want to test the cornerbacks in this defense. They're very good, and I don't want to throw any risky passes their way. But safety-wise, I want to make the safeties think a lot about what they have to do in this game.
Yeah, they have that secondary. Would this secondary, trump the Atlanta secondary? So you wonder if there are big plays to be had by the Philadelphia pass. If there is, which wide receiver do you think has the ability to win his matchup?
I'm probably that's a tough call. I'm probably going Jeffrey just because he's got a size advantage and things. But they're cornerbacks. Remember, cornerbacks by the red, yellow, green rating system, or red is guys you want to avoid. I got all the cornerbacks rated as red-rated cornerbacks. So there's really nobody I would say I want to throw to. I think it's going to be a matter of don't go after matchups, but scheme them a certain way. And Doug Peterson get really creative scheme-wise and say, okay, we're going to find ways to we're going to scheme the receivers open. We're going to have guys creating space and run picks if you guys want to run man man coverages and things, do things to get the receivers open, because I don't think if you're trying to go head up, you're going to get those receivers open against those corners.
Yeah, now Aguilar as the third guy, he's a guy that sometimes is the X factor. He's kind of that guy, the wild card, if you will. Last week it was on a running play. But is there a spot in that secondary that maybe that Aguilar as the third guy in the slot there? I mean, a lot of times that third slot guy for a team is the guy to go after. Not in this case?
Probably. I mean, if I was grading, I would say their slot coverage is probably the weakness of it if I had to pick that. But I just don't think that there's anybody in that secondary. Like I said, they're all red-rated in my book, so I just don't think that there's anybody that the Eagles are going to say, we can target this particular matchup. But, I think they're just going to have to pick and choose in the passing game. Do a lot like they did last week, do a lot of dink and dunk throws.
Yeah, the dink and dunk was something last week. They got Nick Foles in a rhythm, a lot of that run-pass stuff where they put the ball in the belly there and let him kind of, you saw a lot more slants. And the screen game, they did the double screen at one point. Keep it short and get him into the rhythm. That's where Nick Foles seems to excel.
Yeah, he completed 75% of his short passes last week, and he was just over 8 yards per attempt on short passes, which is fantastic. And that's what they only had him throw 7 vertical passes, 7 passes that traveled 11 or more yards downfield, which is, I think, would be a good recipe for success this week. Because also, again, I think if Philadelphia would do well to invite Minnesota to play a kind of a slugfest game like Atlanta did last week, because I think that the biggest worry for Philadelphia would be if Minnesota tries to turn a high-scoring contest. So if you run the ball on offense and invite them to run it on offense, and I think it turns into the kind of matchup that's favorable to Philadelphia.
All right, we got the Eagles' offense against that Vikings defense. Let's flip the script and look at Minnesota's offense led by Case Keenum. Their offensive line, which has some injuries, some guys shuffling around here. So the Eagle defensive line that really maybe was the difference in that game last week up against this Minnesota offensive line.
Minnesota ranked 20th in good blocking rate this year, and that's counting the whole season, not just their injury struggles of late. They're 18th in good blocking productivity. Their pass blocking is a lot superior to their run blocking. They were 8th in sack rate. They were 8th in time in pocket. Their pass pressure rate against New Orleans last week was the best they've had since Week 11. So they're pass blocking exceptionally well. The problem for Minnesota is I think they don't want Keenum throwing the football. When you see that in one pass he threw last week under pressure, he chucked the ball up in the air, and Marcus Williams made the pick. I think they're scared to death that he's going to make those sorts of throws, and that's why I think, again, you can bait them into the kind of game that says, okay, don't throw it. Because if I'm the Eagles, I don't want to see Keenum getting behind great pass blocking and saying, I'm going to go up, I'm going to be throwing to Thielen, I'm going to be throwing to Diggs, I'm going to throw into Rudolph. I want them getting away from that if at all possible.
McKinnon, Latavius Murray. They, kind of a power back with Murray, and then you've got the pass-catching ability for McKinnon. How do you like the running backs matched up with the Eagles' front seven?
McKinnon also has done very well over the years in a metric I have called good blocking yards per attempt. It measures how productive you are when you get good blocking. Problem for the Eagles' rush defense, they have the best good blocking rate allowed this year, 32.9%. So that you're not going to get consistent running gains against them. The problem for them is that when teams did get good gains, they were averaging over 9 yards per attempt. It was one of the highest totals in the league. So they're going to give up big gainers, and McKinnon is the player they have to worry about. They need to make sure that as aggressive as their defense is, when Minnesota is rushing the football, they need to make sure they want to win the point of attack battles, but, man, you just can't let those big gainers go, because all it takes is a couple of those big gainers and give Minnesota a lead, and it turns the whole complexion of the game around.
You got the Thielen-Diggs duo plus the tight end Rudolph. They're all pretty good there. Those three guys are all pretty nice weapons to have. How do you think the Eagles' secondary matches up with the Minnesota passing game?
I'm a little scared about that, especially Thielen. Thielen's a guy who he's an all-around receiver. He's not just a dink and dunk receiver. He's one of the top receivers in vertical receiving yards this year. Diggs has played exceptionally well of late, but he's the guy I would be less concerned about because he's more of a one-trick pony. He's more of a vertical receiver, and I'm not worried as much about his short pass receiving. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm putting doubles on Thielen all day and hoping that I can hold Rudolph in check or, again, invite Minnesota to run the football. Sit back with two safeties all game long and say, fine, you just run the football. We're not going to let you throw vertical at all, and see if the Vikings will do that, because I have a feeling the Vikings will, because they don't want to put this game into Keenum's hand.
Yeah, and Case Keenum, if it is, asked to be put in his hand, what is – his numbers are good. I mean, the numbers are there to suggest, hey, this guy can do it. What is it about Keenum that maybe people still aren't buying into?
He has a very high bad decision rate. That's the metric I have that measures how often a quarterback makes a mental error that leads to a turnover opportunity. Historically, he's done bad on that metric. He's done poorly at times this year. And again, you're talking just like 6-7 weeks ago, the Vikings were thinking of taking Keenum out and putting in Teddy Bridgewater. But despite the fact that Bridgewater had been injured and had the knee injury and it was been like over a year that he'd been in the lineup, that's how worried they are about Case Keenum's decision making. That they are that concerned about it that they actually thought about making that move. So this is a team that just doesn't want to trust him because they've seen enough of his tape and enough of his crazy throws to think this is a guy who I've had somebody mention to me this week that said, remember Brett Favre against New Orleans in that one game, that the Vikings fans are thinking about that crazy pass he threw against New Orleans years ago. That's the same thing Keenum could do.
The Eagles 11 hits last week on Matt Ryan. So where can the Eagles get the pressure on Keenum and make him turn into that bad decision guy?
Yeah, that's the thing. The Eagles, when it comes to their front seven, they've not done as well of late, but I'll tell you this, they do have the number one ranking in time in pocket, so teams generally don't they don't have much time to throw, and I think that they know they're not going to get much time to throw, so they try dink and dunk throws. And the Eagles also had a 33.3% pass pressure rate against Atlanta last week. That's the third highest PPR in the first two rounds of the NFL playoffs, so the pass rush has been getting after quarterbacks pretty well. But if I'm the Eagles, the thing they have to worry about is, again, just make Keenum throw dink and dunk throws, give him that, because I think that the Vikings game plan is going to be dictated by what the Eagles do. Whatever the Eagles will give the Vikings is what the Vikings will go with. So I just make sure to take away the vertical passes and let them dink and dunk and run the ball and turn it into a low-moving game.
Vikings very good on defense on third down and getting you off the field there, and last week the Eagles were pretty good. It's a number that they weren't very good at, but when you look at Case Keenum, sometimes he's better when you pressure him. Even though he makes bad decisions and makes mistakes, sometimes he's at his best when he's getting out of there.
Yeah, he is. He can be at his best when he gets out of there, and he can also be because he's very good on the scramble too. And Thielen's very good at that on the scramble plays. He's exceptional. He's very dangerous. He's a guy who, if you cover him on his first initial route, and then you have that kind of a play, he's a guy who can get away. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm telling you, everything to me, the game plan is take Thielen out of the game because he's such the game breaker, and try and limit Diggs. But really take Thielen out of the game, because if Thielen gets going and that passing game gets going, I think it turns into kind of a shootout game that Philadelphia just wouldn't win.
Casey Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we break down this matchup here. So, where is the area that you are looking at to give one team an advantage over the other?
There's a metric that ESPN Stats and Information has called Special Teams Expected Points Added. It measures special teams performance, and it basically says how many points are you expecting to get from special teams performance. The Eagles this year during the regular season, they got 17.4 points in this category, made it rated 8th in the league. The Vikings got minus 11.7 and ranked 23rd in the league. You take that together, that's about a 30-point differential, maybe 2-point difference on a per-game basis. I think the Eagles could turn that into a 3-point difference in this contest, and that may be the thing that makes the biggest difference, is they can get a big special teams win.
Yeah, and the Eagles special teams obviously had the couple snafus last week, and Doug was asked about that heavily on Monday. Hey, did you address this with Dave Phipp? So that's something that they really are focusing on. The muffed punt, the kick out of bounds, a missed extra point, very unlike the Philadelphia Eagles special teams. And let me ask you about, you have the metrics and all the things that you look at, and how about how they translate from home to road? Minnesota's defense going on the road.
I think that Minnesota's defense, again, their defense gets protected by their offense. People don't think that's the case because they have such a shutdown secondary, but this defense is a lot like what Dallas's defense was last year, where Dallas's offensive line is so good, or at least their offense controls the ball as much as they do. Minnesota's offensive line is nowhere near what Dallas's offensive line was last year or even this year, but they control the ball so well. They rank second in the league in time of possession, the Vikings did, so they protect their defense. And if I'm Philadelphia, I'm trying to win that battle and flip that over and say, we're going to win the time possession, we're going to win that battle, and we're going to wear your defense out, because I think the Vikings defense, they benefit a lot from what their offense does to protect them, and if you take that away, I think it could open up some doors for Philadelphia.
Okay, we'll get Casey's pick on this game in just a little bit, but first, Let's look at the AFC matchup. We don't know about Tom Brady. They're being very coy up there, and obviously he is a big difference maker in that game. But what about the Jacksonville defense? I mean, last week that was the talk. Can their defense win in the game? Well, their offense scored 45. Their defense gave up 42. That game was a little hokey, but still, did you see something in the Jacksonville defense that worries you this week?
And Jacksonville is terrific in the pass rush. They led the league in quarterback contact rate. They were second in pass pressure rate, and they were second in sack rate. And they're that good. And if they get going, they can get that sort of thing going. And they've got great cornerbacks too. But their rush defense has been terrible. They were a sieve early in the season. They got better for a few weeks. But they're ranked 23rd in rush yards allowed from weeks 12 to the end of the season, and they also they ranked 24th in good blocking rate and 20th in good blocking productivity, and they're a defense that just can't be moved. And New England rated 7th in good blocking rate this year, and I rated their run blocking overall as an A-. I think that they can get a huge win there, and if Brady's good enough to dink and dunk throw and they can run the ball that well, I think the front seven, that pass rush is just going to be neutralized.
The one thing that you look at with Jacksonville is they like to run the ball with Fournette. Bortles is a guy that he's. What do you think about Bortles? I mean, the numbers are very interesting with him, but a lot of people either like him, don't like him. He holds them back, or I mean, what are we supposed to surmise about Blake Bortles?
There's a part of me that really wants to see him succeed because he's from Oviedo, which is not far from where I live, so it's a local boy makes good. So you'd like to see that, but he's always been a risk-taking quarterback. Back to his days at UCF, he's one of those fastball pitchers, and even if you tell him, hey, you need to throw a changeup here, he wants to throw the fastball because he's got the big arm. And that's part of his problem is that he had the worst bad decision rate in the league last year. He didn't do that well in that metric this year, so and their pass blocking has been okay this year, but it's not been great. And their run blocking, actually, they're 21st in good blocking rate. They get some big gainers out of Fournette, but I think that they're going to have to count on Fournette getting the big gainers because I think that if you're trying to rely on Bortles versus a Bill Belichick secondary, and the Patriots rated 5th in pass pressure rate from weeks 11 to the end of the season. Their pass pressure has been a whole lot better. If you got Bortles going up against the pass rush and exotic coverages, I think he'll make a lot of mistakes.
Everybody, I think, last week, I don't think people were surprised that Jacksonville won. I think it was just the fact that they scored 45 points in that game. So if they are to win this week, what is the style of game you see?
I think the thing is I don't think that they can do well enough because New England's rush defense, they were 30th in good blocking rate allowed this year, and they allowed more games of 100 or more rushing yards to opposing teams than all but 6 teams. So, I mean, that's a team that you can run the ball on a lot. So I think Jacksonville will want to do that. The problem is I just think that as long as Brady's hand is not in terrible shape. I mean, they said he had a couple of stitches on it, like 4 stitches, but as long as it's not to the point where he can't throw the dink and dunk throws, because I think that's what he'll do all day long. If he can do dink and dunk throws and they can run it, I think New England's going to put up good 28, 35 points, and I think that Jacksonville is not going to be able to do that if they lean on their ground game. So I think Jacksonville needs to kind of mimic last week and say, fine, we're just going to go in a full-blown shootout, and if Bortles loses, he loses, but we've got to try and turn this thing high scoring because we're not going to win a slugfest.
All right. The interesting matchup will be Gronkowski in that game, basically getting called out by Jalen Ramsey. And he's not seen a guy like me before. The Jacksonville defense, obviously, they think that's their calling card. Brady and that offense there. So, in the end, which unit pulls out the win here? Is it the Jacksonville defense that carries them to the Super Bowl, or is it the Patriots offense that gets them back to the Super Bowl?
I think it's the Patriots offense. I think the Jacksonville defense, I mean, as great as it is in some cases, it had a couple of games with 10 sacks. You take those out of there, suddenly the pass rush numbers don't look quite so good. And those were against teams that didn't pass block very well. This is not a consistent pass rushing line. They can do great at times, but not so great at other times. The Patriots ranked, they had an A- in pass blocking grades. They were 5th in pass pressure rate allowed this year. I don't think the Jacksonville front seven is going to get there, and I think what's going to happen is the New England blocking wall is going to dominate the Jacksonville defensive front seven and neutralize the Jacksonville secondary. When all that happens, I think Jacksonville's defense is going to have 2 games in a row where they give up more than 30 points, and everybody's going to rethink how great that defense is.
All right, so he likes New England in that one. Philadelphia at home, hosting Minnesota. You broke down all the matchups to watch in that one. So, who do you like to walk on or head to Minnesota?
80% of the people, the NFL analysts who are listed on NFLPickWatch.com right now, that's a site that tracks NFL picks over the course of the season, 80% of pickers right now are picking the Vikings. I would never have thought I'd been that heavily in the Vikings direction. Personally, I think that the Vikings are going to fall into the same trap that Atlanta fell into last week. Philadelphia is going to invite them to get into a slugfest. Minnesota is going to do it. Philadelphia is better at slugfest football than Minnesota is, and I think Philadelphia wins the game because of that.
So Casey Joyner likes Philadelphia to win the game over the Vikings. So we're half and half again. We've got two Vikings.
That was our opening music. It's time to win the game.
We've got Philly 2. Sal Powell likes the Eagles. Ross Tucker likes the Vikings. Johnny Mack likes the Vikings. And Casey Joyner likes the Eagles to advance to Super Bowl 52. All right, pal. We'll break it all down on Monday's show and see if the Eagles are going to Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, guys.